It's remake time. Our original Arcanine video was 9 years ago, being uploaded on June 23rd, 2017. This fan favorite has had a lot happen to it in that time frame, including gaining an instantly beloved regional form. With this much to cover, we're jumping right into the question, how great were Arcanine and Hisuian Arcanine actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Of all the Gen 1 fire types belabored by their status as such, Arcanine was at least compensated by a solid set of stats, or it would have been had it had the solid base 100 special attack that it received in Gen 2 and on. Instead, its singular special stat came from its career-long 80 special defense, and so its stab fire blast didn't hit nearly as hard as they could have. This wouldn't have changed Arcanine's inability to find a niche in OU or UU, but it was a shame since it had such solid bulk and speed, and its lack of strength in this regard meant it dropped really low. It dropped into the incredibly niche world of sub-NU metagames, first falling past even PU and into ZU. A metagame so niche, it was past our previous coverage cutoff point. In Gen 1, ZU consisted of many final stage Pokemon, like Arcanine, slugging it out with not fully evolved like Drowsy and Ammonite. But at the very least, Arcanine was found to be too much for the tier and banned. Arcanine then found sufficient viability to not only rise to PU, a metagame whose final stages often went head-on with Abra and Ghastly, but also received a suspect test there as well. It would still leave the tier upon finding a niche in NU, which was that of a fine lead. It threatened out the common status lead Venomoth, and thanks to a lack of Thunderbolt weaknesses and higher special bulk, could tangle with Mr. Mime leads far better than its primary fire competition that was also often used in the lead slot, Charizard. Arcanine was actually a fine partner for Charizard on so-called fire spam teams, weakening the opposition through its solidly powerful body slams and hyper beams alongside Fire Blast, with the benefit of Agility's Gen 1 mechanics, letting it bypass Paralysis' speed drop. Body Slam's 30% paralysis rate and Fire Blast Gen 1 30% burn rate meant it was a fine status spreader as well. Overall, Arcanine had its own sort of success, albeit unusual in the first generation. But the same could not really be said for the second. Oh sure, Arcanine defaulted to a higher tier this time around because it was better overall now that it gained its solid special attack stat, but it was hardly a world beater with it, and didn't go on to do anything with its UU placement. It did gain a move that would become incredibly important for the rest of its career, Extreme Speed. But as cool as the idea of Curse boosting into straightened Extreme Speed, bypassing the lowered speed, with Stab Fire Blast to chase away steals, it just wasn't a strategy particularly well suited to the bulked out Gen 2 landscape, and Arcanine couldn't do much of anything else either. Its move pool wasn't completely dry, as it did have Crunch for the Slowbro and Hypno that were so popular in UU, but Fires were still not well off this early on, struggling with the other resists that be thrown their way. Hidden Power did exist, but the cost of using Arcanine's desired HP Grass was so high, severely cutting into its bulk and defeating much of the purpose of using Arcanine in the first place, especially since it wasn't like it became an unstoppable wall breaker without it. It still struggled with metagame staple Blastoise. It was a shame because Arcanine's stats were actually excellent by UU standards. Its 559 BST was actually the highest in the tier, but it didn't have the tools to put it to any use besides a generic, technically I guess you could use it rest talk set that nobody would actually bring. Gen 2 pretty much passed it by, but things were about to get better. But first, improve your mobile gaming performance with our sponsor, Red Magic. Red Magic has their best phone yet, the Red Magic 11S Pro. The phone is a direct upgrade from the 10S Pro due to having the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 and a much faster GPU and CPU. And let me tell you, I can't thank them enough every time they sponsor me, even though their phones hook me into playing games all the time. Everything on this phone runs so well, from Pocket TCG to even games that require a bit more performance from your phone, like Call of Duty Mobile or Zenless Zone Zero. This phone literally never drops frames, and I honestly can't wait for Pokemon Champions to come out on mobile so I can just play it all the time on this phone. But for now, we have Pokemon Showdown, which looks great on here. And the games run very smooth because of Red Magic's innovative liquid metal cooling, which you can see on the back of the phone here. Liquid metal transfers CPU heat to a heat spreader, which then distributes heat evenly across the entire device. It also runs for hours and charges really fast thanks to its 7500 mAh battery, and now even features wireless fast charging. I will never be able to focus on work again. So if you want a sick gamer phone and also support the channel to help us produce more content, you can click my link in the description below to learn more about the Red Magic 11S Pro. For the majority of Gen 3's existence, Arcanine languished in the comically overlarge BL tier. While this meant it was higher up in tiering status than before, and it was indeed much better with the new EV cap system, which meant it was dishing out more damage while also helping absorb it with two great abilities, Intimidate and Flash Fire, the latter potentially making it even stronger, though Intimidate wound up being far more useful in Gen 3, where fires were less threatening and thus in less need of having their stabs absorbed. Arcanine also benefited from being able to run Hidden Power without destroying its stats. Its universal agreement as being too much for UU meant there wasn't really anywhere to use it, as it certainly wasn't going to hack it in OU, barring gimmicky house sets that were really just excuses for someone to use their beloved Arcanine. You wouldn't see it otherwise, barring occasional tournaments centered around niche formats like the old Summer Freedom setup of standard UU, but with one BL allowed, where Arcanine was consistently among the best of the best. For a very long time, that had been all she wrote for Gen 3 Arcanine. But with Gen 3 UU becoming one of the most popular retro non-OU metagames, with a player base enthusiastic to make the tier the best it could be, eventually some of the BLs were tested. And after a brief trial period, Arcanine and Lapras were officially unbanned and made part of UU. Now, Lapras was quite good, but Arcanine was downright elite. In fact, many top players considered it the number 2 Pokemon in the tier, right behind Queen Kangaskhan, an opinion reflected by Arcanine's regularly having the second most usage. Even if it wasn't literally number 2 though, there was no denying its excellence and popularity. It was a hugely important and overall positive addition to the tier, helping pivot around threats like Scyther and Kangaskhan itself with its invaluable Intimidate, while offering a healthy amount of offensive pressure against balanced teams without being overbearing. Fire Blast and its hidden power of choice effortlessly threatened much of the tier, whether it's HP Grass Standard for Blastoise and Amistar, or ground to smack its common check Tentacruel, as well as other Arcanine. Its extreme speed was also incredibly valuable for both offensive and defensive purposes, and how it finished off all manner of faster threats. Priority was generally excellent in UU for reversal sweepers like Hitmonlee and the aforementioned Scyther. In its final move slot, Arcanine had many excellent options: Overheat for the extra burst damage and crucial 1v1s against Kangaskhan, Crunch for Slow King and Thick Fat Grumpig, Toxic for generally threatening walls like Cradily, or even Thief to steal something's leftovers for itself. Arcanine may have arrived to Gen 3 UU late, but it became the life of the party once it did. But the UU metagame it is most associated with would be in the following generation. Finally, Arcanine came into its own as a current gen UU star. Well, not immediately at first. It was quote-unquote only a good Pokemon, but it was now exactly what it had wanted to be all along. Thanks to Gen 4 introducing the physical special split and adding Flare Blitz, Arcanine could now use Fire Stab off of its higher attack stat. It also received physical anti-water coverage and Thunder Fang. Fires in general got better and hit harder in Gen 4, which meant Arcanine's Flash Fire became much more useful and meant it could now extract superb utility from both its abilities. Arcanine had several solid sets. It was a fine attacking lead with extreme speed to finish off Focus Sashes and Lumberry to eat up status. It was a decent mid-game mixed attacker that enjoyed the new power of Life Orb, and it could even go all out with a Choice Band set whose Flare Blitzes smashed through physical tanks like Donphan, and whose Thunder Fang with Stealth Rock in play could even 2-hit KO even the otherwise unbreakable Milotic. But speaking of rocks, doesn't Arcanine also gain the new burden of fire types this gen, which is of severely limited longevity, especially if it takes recoil from its Fire Stab and potentially even the Life Orb of the mixed attacker? Yes, absolutely. And this was its limitation throughout Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. But then Heart Gold and Soul Silver came around and gave Arcanine access to Morning Sun. This move rocketed it to superstardom, tremendously useful on not just the Life Orb attacker, but in creating new defensive variants that would become Arcanine's calling card. Even with Morning Sun's limited 8 PP, alongside Arcanine's Stealth Rock weakness, it was still a tremendously reliable hit taker. And if you paired it with Rapid Spin and managed to keep Stealth Rock off, that it became borderline immortal, devouring hits so easily that it wouldn't even have to heal and could instead focus its attention to doling out damage, whether directly from its effortlessly strong Flare Blitz or indirectly from the Toxic it was an incredible spreader of. Morning Sun was so good, Arcanine didn't just have to use it on offensive or defensive sets. It also created a hybrid of both that fit bulky offense and balanced teams beautifully. This variant, which hit hard while focusing on being able to take hits as well, was called Morning Glory, since Oasis was popular at the time. The Arcanine most shown as a Wonder Wall with its specially defensive set. Intimidate with max HP let it tank so many physical attacks already, naturally letting it take on threats like Blaziken, and focusing on special defense investment. It became astonishingly difficult to break through even for many of the tier's stronger special attacks. Milotic's super effective Surf bounced off, while powerful neutral hits like Moltres' Air Slash, Alakazam's Psychic, and Miss Magius' Nasty Plot boosted Shadow Ball weren't breaking it in a hurry either, especially since Arcanine was hardly a passive wall that they could take their time with. Arcanine was a UU staple, most impressive for being the rarest of things, a defensive Stealth Rock weak Pokemon so good that the Rock's weakness hardly even bothered it. And this is while having only 8 PP on its recovery move, which is borderline miraculous. Arcanine was actually one of the reasons Gen 4 UU was such a popular tier, because who doesn't love a metagame where such a fan favorite isn't just good, but one of the best Pokemon available? Now in Gen 5, it wasn't like Arcanine was getting ignored, far from it. It got some huge upgrades to its coverage. First, it got to brandish none other than the Rock destroying close combat, and as if that wasn't sufficiently synergistic, it even had its electric coverage upgraded to Wild Charge. Amazing, right? Oh sure, it wouldn't be breaking into OU, despite some excitement over these new moves in the initial days of Gen 5, but it was sure to have another excellent round of UU, or so it seemed. While it had some use in the tier's early stages, it quickly dissipated as the metagame began to resemble the previous generation's OU. Nominally, Arcanine was still a decent Pokemon. In practice, it wasn't one you'd actually be using, as it was just too much of a struggle for its defensive sets to keep up with the Zapdoses and Flygons and Swampers running around, while offensively, even with Wild Charge, it struggled to break through new water walls like Suicune and Regenerator Slowbro, being far likelier to go down to Stealth Rock, Life Orb, and recoil damage before it achieved anything. Arcanine was just far too easy to play around for every kind of team, and what's more is that UU wasn't exactly lacking in excellent offensive fire-type options either. In fact, Victini and Darmanitan absolutely dominated the tier and outclassed Arcanine thoroughly, so if Arcanine didn't have much going for it, why did it continue to languish in UU? Here's where its fan favorite status worked against it. It started in UU and new players would see that it was there and use it, and thus Arcanine's usage managed to stay high enough to not drop to RU, where it would have been absolutely excellent, seeing as Gen 5 RU was noted for its resemblance of Arcanine's beloved Gen 4 UU. It was a shame that Arcanine was so passed over after the initial excitement over its new tools. Arcanine surprisingly had a couple of placements. It didn't really have a place in the meta, but you could do far worse than Intimidate along with those stats. These placements were Martin Brookshaw, 11 at the Australian Nationals, and Mateo Gini, 31st at Worlds. Now, after Arcanine being largely overlooked in Gen 5, it's a shame that somehow it was much the same story in the 6th generation, and almost assuredly once again, because Arcanine was such a popular design, because it could hardly even pretend to have a niche in the tier this time around. In early XY, it was decent, but only just barely, and didn't really do much, just sort of gestured vaguely towards some generic hit-taking, not having any specific use or defensive niche, not able to even pretend towards any sort of half-hearted offense, but it really disappeared in ORAS. Well, in serious play anyway, the one time you could have justified its defensive utility was towards the end of the generation, where Entei's banded, burn-happy Sacred Fire was driving the player base berserk, and Arcanine occupied a unique capability for switching into it, but despite everyone being at their wits' end to try and stop Entei, they still knew better than to use Arcanine, which just didn't do anything else defensively, and certainly didn't do enough back to opponents on the offensive end. Then the metagame adjusted to Entei, and Arcanine really had nothing it could do. Not that it did anything in the first place. It really was tragic that in spite of all this, it didn't drop to RU, where it would have thrived. Having said all that, when Mega Mawile was destroying OU, some players devised Rocky Helmet Arcanine was perhaps the only true answer to this monster that would eventually be banned. Not that this was a real niche, of course, it was absolutely a gimmick, but somehow it was the most tangibly useful thing Arcanine did all generation. Arcanine's Fairy Resist made it far more usable than before. Most notably, it absolutely dominated Mega Mawile. Intimidate was always good enough that, alongside its solid stats and Will-O-Wisp to really ruin Mega Kangaskhan, Arcanine had enough of a place in the 2015 meta as a sort of cross between Landorus, Therian, and Heatran that also had the vast utility of the special attack lowering Snarl and the teammate strengthening Helping Hand. It also had several excellent item choices, the ability to punish the contact moves it weakened through Rocky Helmet, the healing of Citrus Berry, and even occasionally blocking a Mungus' Spore with safety goggles. As a result, Arcanine had many solid placements. They were Evan Foray, 7th at the Oregon Regionals, Philip Wingett, 5th at the California Regionals, Michael Fladung, 4th at the Missouri Regionals, Adit Selvaraj, 7th at the Florida Regionals, Jake Huang Tig, 15th at the Washington Regionals, Wolf Glick, 1st at the Massachusetts Regionals, Chance Alexander, 5th at the Kansas Regionals, Toller Webb, 4th at the Georgia Regionals, Nick C, 7th at the Senior Division Australian Nationals, Adrian Baumann, 8th, Christopher Schumacher, 12th, and Daniel Pastor, 14th, respectively, at the German Nationals, Jamie Miller, 7th at the UK Nationals, Riccardo Rispoli, 8th, Adrian Baumann, 33rd, and Federico Superti, 39th at the Italian Nationals, Yande Rem and Haru Chin, top 16 at the Japanese Nationals, John Hugh, 32nd at the US Nationals, and at Worlds, Jamie Miller finished outside the top 39, while Miguel Marti de la Torre came 18th, and Adrian Baumann came in 10th, respectively. Adrian Baumann proving himself the ultimate Gen 6 Arcanine trainer. Now we look ahead, finding ourselves in Generation 7, where at long last it landed in RU, and there it was decent. It was a bit too late for Arcanine to thrive in the tier at this stage of power creep. Previously, it almost surely would have been, if not an elite staple, then at least very, very good. Now it was merely decent, not the kind of thing you'd see at all regularly. It was reasonably threatening offensively, but the real appeal was how thoroughly it countered Ninetales, one of its fire-type competitors, and whose choice specs and nasty plot sets made it one of the most frightening threats in the tier, with its drought summon sunlight boosting its fire stab and enabling automatic solar beam. Arcanine didn't just completely counter Ninetales, thanks to Flash Fire completely stuffing the latter's fire moves, it actually weaponized Ninetales' existence against it. Ninetales' Sun not only strengthened Arcanine's Flare Blitz, but even made Arcanine's Morning Sun heal more, going from its usual 50% to an excellent 66%. Not just taking on such a threat, but using it as an opportunity to make yourself stronger was a nice niche. Arcanine's problem was that it didn't do much else. It wasn't able to fit all the moves it needed in order to be as threatening as it needed. In addition to Flare Blitz, Morning Sun, Wild Charge, and Extreme Speed, it also wanted close combat to not get completely blanked by Rhyperior, but giving any of its moves up was a tall task. Additionally, Ninetales and the tier's other major fire competition, the metagame-defining Salazzle, were more broadly useful than Arcanine, as they were far more threatening, being stronger, faster, and with more useful move pools. Arcanine wasn't bad outright, but it was unquestionably a minor Pokemon in Gen 7 RU that didn't see much serious usage at all. It would have actually been better off in NU at this point. On the bright side, VGC was a different story, as in the 2017 season, Arcanine exploded into VGC stardom. It became one of the best, most important Pokemon around, with no Landorus Therian around to compete with, and generally facing off against a metagame that had a very, very hard time threatening it. As always, Intimidate was the best ability in the format, and went beautifully with not just Arcanine's great bulk, but the newfound super healing of the new pinch heal berries, like Mago Berry healing a whopping 50% once it hit a quarter of its health or less, which was huge on something that took hits as well as Arcanine. Its support move pool was out in full force against pretty much the entire metagame. It also sometimes opted for Roar, whose negative priority wasn't quite as negative as Trick Rooms, and thus allowed Arcanine to foil such a setup, while the healing of Morning Sun was also an option. Interestingly, Arcanine could also lean into Z Crystals to take a more offensive approach, whether with Firium Z turning Flare Blitz into a recoil-lacking, far stronger Infernal Overdrive, or with Electrium Z turning Wild Charge into Gigavolt Havoc that would crush unsuspecting waters like the meta-defining Tapu Fini. Arcanine was still naturally loaded with defensive utility, but gained a new dimension to its game when it leaned into its ability to directly threaten opponents, especially since it also made superb use of Extreme Speed's priority. If this team didn't want it using a Z Crystal, Life Orb was also a fine option. And then there was the excellent offensive-defensive variant that combined Arcanine's two approaches, Assault Vest, which leaned into its all-out attacking, though this was still not without utility as it could utilize Snarl on such a set, while also increasing its overall hit-taking, combining Intimidate's attack drops with Assault Vest's special defense boost, which of course Snarl could potentially enhance even more. Being so apt defensively actually made it even easier for Arcanine to throw out its powerful attacks too. Arcanine was a metagame staple. It formed an elite Fire-Water Grass core alongside Tapu Fini and Kartana, with Fini's Misty Surge guarding against status, and Arcanine's Intimidate and Snarl all enabling Assault Vest Kartana to superb heights, becoming incredibly tanky and status immune, and thereby making it even more of an offensive threat. The Arc Fini Cart trio often made up the so-called fake PG team archetype, with Gigalith, Porygon 2, and Tapu Koko rounding out the fray. The trio also synergized tremendously with other top-tier meta picks like Garchomp and Snorlax. As a result, Arcanine was so incredibly common and successful that we're limiting its placements to first places only. There's a bunch of them, and here are them on screen. And that's also before Worlds, where Arcanine quote-unquote only reached second thanks to Sam Pandelis. Arcanine was basically the Landorus Therian and Incineroar of 2017. It was all over every tournament and was so common and wound up winning the vast majority of them too. It's easily one of the most successful VGC seasons of anything ever. Afterwards though, its usage dropped off a cliff because none other than Incineroar came along to outclass it completely, while Landorus Therian returned as well. It must be mentioned though that a select few players tried to use Arcanine, and among these these few uses, Benjamin O'Neill actually won Perth Regionals with it, and that was amazing for the 2018 season. But perhaps even more amazingly, Arcanine also had some uses in the 2019 restricted format, thanks to Jeremy Rodriguez at 10th at the Philadelphia Regionals, Andriel Herrera 6th at the Guayaquil Special Event, Giacomo Bovalenta 16th at the Lille Special Event. Phew. Now we can finally move on to Gen 8, which gave Arcanine two incredible buffs. First, heavy duty boots is always a major boon to any Stealth Rock weak Pokemon, and Arcanine seemed especially poised to take great advantage of it, whether by being freer than ever to fire off powerful flare blitzes, or to perhaps see its defensive set make a comeback with an incredible new sense of longevity, especially because of the second buff, Teleport, which became generational for how it was now a negative priority move. The best possible option for a defensively solid Pokemon wanting to provide its more offensive teammates with safe switches. What more could Arcanine ask for? Wherever it wound up, it was going to be great now, right? Well, it started by dropping the lowest it had been since the first generation, landing all the way down in NU. Well, that's fine, because a Pokemon with Intimidate, a switch move, and a reliable recovery, talk about a recipe for success, especially with Arcanine's stats seemingly excellent by NU standards. This isn't even getting into how Arcanine's Fire Stab threatens Steels and many poisons who were also half grass, like Vileplume, making it a classically excellent Toxic Spreader. So how did it wind up? Okay, maybe great is too much to ask, but you'd think very good at the very least. But even that estimate wound up overshooting Arcanine's actual place in the tier. It was, as in the previous generation's RU, simply okay. It wasn't even that its tools weren't useful, it was just in the same tier as a Pokemon that did its job far better. And it didn't start out that way. Early on, Arcanine's utility was valuable for dealing with threats like Copperajah and Beware, but as the metagame progressed, the player base came to realize just how outclassed it was by Talonflame, which yes, lacked Intimidate, but maintained the switch move aspect with U-turn, while also being much faster and more forceful, both from its speed and the power of Stab Brave Bird. It also had double the PP on its recovery move, with Roost to 16 as opposed to Morning Sun's 8. So how did it even stay in the tier in the first place if it was so outclassed? PU was calling, and it would have been great there. Technically, what Arcanine did have over Talonflame was that it was less mortally afraid of knockoff, as it was far better than Talonflame at navigating its Stealth Rock weakness in the event its boots gets knocked. But this wasn't nearly enough to put any sort of meaningful bridge in the gigantic gap between them. Once again, Arcanine's popularity worked against it, while also once again, it had VGC to look forward to. Early in the 2020 season, Arcanine usage exploded once again, perhaps not to the absurd highs of 2017, but unmatched standard aside, it actually wasn't that far off. With no Incineroar or Landorus around, players once again want the best Intimidate option, and thus Arcanine was everywhere. It had an excellent new dimension to its game in being highly effective at using Dynamax for defensive purposes against opposing Dynamax threats. Beyond that, it was largely business as usual. The 50% pinch healing berries had been nerfed, but this was a little more than a mild inconvenience, as Arcanine accumulated so many high placements in the format's early stage tournaments that we have once again limited ourselves to its most high placing finishes, sticking to top 10 here. Using Arcanine were, at Bochum Regionals, first place Guillermo Castillo Diaz and second place Alex Soto, as well as 8th place Florian van Huijdonk, respectively. At the Dallas Regionals, 4th place Justin Burns, 6th place Justin Krubra, 8th place Jake Skirchak, respectively. At the Oceania International Championships, Melbourne, 2nd place Eduardo Cunha, 3rd place Ragav Malavia, 4th place Nihil Noor, 6th place James Casaros, respectively, 7th place Brady Smith, 8th place Eric Reels, and 10th place Zachary Kelly, respectively. Then at the Collinsville Regionals, 1st place Andrew Ding, 4th place Michael Alex Aran, 5th place Alberto Lara, and 7th place Justin Ramirez, respectively. Then in March, Incineroar was released, and well, Arcanine didn't completely disappear, but it came close. Its higher speed for Fast Snarl and Will-O-Wisp and higher special attack for Spread Heat Wave were nice, but it only saw occasional uses from that point on. Thanks to Alexander Lasardi, Malmo Regionals, Christopher Kahn once again at the 2nd Perth Regionals, Antonio Sanchez 9th at the Players Cup 1 Global Finals. That was it for 2020. In 2021, Arcanine managed a few more placements, like Wu Chen actually winning a regional with it in Kaohsiung, Taiwan, Ryota Otsubo reaching 2nd with it at the Players Cup 25th Anniversary International, and Raylan Lowe reaching 14th with it at the Asia Players Cup Singapore Qualifier. Finally, in 2022, Arcanine managed 2 uses, one from Josh Ferris, who reached 13th at the Vancouver Regionals, and the other from Francois X de Leganeste, 16th at the Liverpool Regionals. Another solid VGC season for Arcanine, or well, mini season, in the case of its initially incredible cut short too soon 2020. With terrestrialization, Arcanine returning to NU seemed to have the the potential to finally run that cursed extreme speed set that I first wanted to way back in Gen 2. Terra Normal on boosted extreme speeds while becoming more difficult to KO on the physical side, especially with the switch of its typing. That's gotta count for something, right? Nope. Arcanine is considered so bad in Gen 9 NU, it is literally placed in the viability rankings do not use tier. It just doesn't match up well against the metagame. Oh, and it happens to share that tier with Incineroar. Yeah, that'll do it. Once again, no PU for Arcanine, what a shame. Fortunately, Gen 9 is also Arcanine's best gen in singles since the 4th, and that's because of its brand new Hisuian form, whose destructive potential not only managed a minor-only niche with a choice band set, but has made Hisuian Arcanine a legitimate force in UU. Stats-wise, Hisuian Arcanine isn't staggeringly different, though it is an improvement. It goes down 5 base speed to 90, which isn't great, but also not game-breaking, and its base special attack goes down 5 as well, to 95. These are reasonable prices to pay for the 5 extra base HP, bringing it up to 95, and especially the 5 extra base attack, now putting it at a seriously respectable 115 that's needed to compete when surrounded by the power creep to end all power creep. Hisuian Arcanine is actually one of the hardest hitters in the entire game though. That base 115 attack is certainly very good, but also deceiving relative to how much damage it dishes out, and that's because it also gains half rock typing and access to stab head smash. You know, that 150 base power monstrosity. Put it this way, at base 110 attack, Aggron's head smash had notoriously ripped up Gen 4 UU and even OU at times, despite its horrendous speed. Now Hisuian Arcanine was much faster and even stronger. The only problem, Aggron could get away with it because of its rock head ability, which prevented head smash's staggering 50% recoil of damage done from kicking in. Alright, Hisuian Arcanine also gets rock head, so the only thing stopping it from head smashing everything in sight is the move's 80% accuracy. Admittedly, somewhat of an obstacle. After all, it's the same accuracy as the famously unreliable Stone Edge, but on the bright side, Hisuian Arcanine has another stab that happens to be 100% accurate, in Flare Blitz. Oh, and would you look at that? In addition to its Flare Blitz outdamaging its Cantonian counterpart, Hisuian Arcanine also gets the benefit of using it without incurring any recoil. Oh, and it can go even further still. If it goes Terra Normal for those excellent extreme speeds, Hisuian Arcanine can also slot in another powerful move, Double Edge, and not take any recoil from that either. It's the stuff of dreams. Fire Rock is famously terrible defensive typing, but Hisuian Arcanine doesn't have any interest in that. It just wants to bring the heat on offense, and man does it do that. The closest it gets to defensive play is the superb utility that it receives a bonus of going off half rock, which allows Hisuian Arcanine to even set Stealth Rock if it desires. Its lack of defensive utility did hold Hisuian Arc back slightly, but really only slightly. It was a great Pokemon, tearing through the most power crept UU ever. Heavy Duty Boots allowed it to gleefully launch its dual stabs to the full terrifying extent of their power, putting serious dents in even resist. For instance, Keldeo resisted both stabs, but it certainly didn't take kindly to either, especially Head Smash, and as with anything trying to take Hisuian Arcanine on, it wasn't just enough for it to switch in, take a hit, and outspeed, because there was always extreme speed lurking to finish such checks off from low health. Once Hisuian Arcanine hit the field, it was a nightmare to pivot around, regularly leaving huge damage strewn in its wake against the majority of teams not packing Donphan or Gastrodon, and even then, that Donphan better be healthy enough to take multiple Flare Blitzes, while Gastrodon had to watch out for Terra Normal Double Edge. Hisuian Arcanine could also run a Focus Sash lead set for early Stealth Rock, taking advantage of its great matchup against Excadrill, and generally delighting in, with even less concern for its health than usual, freely blasting the opponent with enormous damage after rocks had been set. Hisuian Arcanine's frightening power warped defense in UU, and brought Morning Glory back to the Arcanine line. Now over to VGC. Once again, Arcanine was a strong choice in Gen 9 VGC when Incineroar wasn't around, for all the same reasons, and this meant of course that its usage went through the roof early on once again. It enjoyed its return to the spotlight in Regulation B and C formats, most commonly sporting a safety goggle set, which took an aggressive approach to its utility, both spreading burns with Will-O-Wisp and keeping faster targets in check with extreme speed. Once again, we selected limited placements because there were a lot, so much so that we're keeping it to top 5 this time around. Congratulations to these players on screen for doing so well with Arcanine. Once again, Arcanine was all over the place for much of the 2023 season, but that was before Incineroar made its glorious return in Regulation F, and once again one-upped Arcanine completely, leaving it to disappear just about completely. At least it appeared at Worlds coming in 86 with Yusuke Suganezawa, but it was on the fringes again. It also got a few notable placements in 2024, with Brendan Zhang 21st and Justin Tang 15th respectively at the Pittsburgh Regionals, and Chong Jung Peng 20th at the Latin American International Champions Sao Paulo. Still, for the third consecutive generation, it was amazing before the big wrestling cat appeared. On the brighter side, Kanto wasn't the only Arcanine appearing in VGC. Hisuian Arcanine also had a niche, and quite a good one. Stab Rock Slide off of a great attack and worthwhile speed is always a good weapon, especially for how it threatens Incineroar without without having to explicitly target it. Hisuian Arcanine had a couple of different sets it could use. Notably, it could go with a rocket of a choice bander, combining rock heads enabling a recoilless head smash and flare blitz with a powerful, potentially Terra normal extreme speed. Or it could stick with the utility of intimidate a couple of different ways. First, it dropped the choice band, giving itself flexibility between using rock slide, flare blitz, extreme speed, and protect, while using clear amulet as its item to prevent Incineroar from intimidating it, which really letting it threaten its rock slides to the fullest extent. Alternatively, Hisuian Arcanine could go with a mirror herb with close combat over extreme speed. The mirror herb allowed it to weaponize Swords Dances from King Gambit and Sneasler, as well as bulk up from Annihilate, taking their boost for itself and crushing them. An Assault Vest set with Terra Blast Fairy or Grass was also worthwhile in 2023 Series 4 format, while otherwise, Hisuian Arcanine wasn't seen as much that year. The notable exception was at Worlds, where Yuta Takahashi used it to place 15th. Hisuian Arcanine's offensive potential was more recognized in the 2024 season, and its usage took off. Good job to James Bake, first at the Peoria Regionals, Simon Salvito, first at the Lille Regionals, Michael Zhang, first at the Sacramento Regionals, Oliver Escalante, first, Simon Salvito, second, and Davide Miraglia, seventh at the Gigants Regionals, Chupacross the fourth, first, Ragav Malavia, third, Jamie Boyd, the fourth, and Bobby Rochelle, fifth at the Toronto Regionals, Lorenzo Silvestrini, first, and Danielle Puntarelli, sixth at the Stuttgart Regionals, respectively. Post Incineroar introduction in Regulation F, Hisuian Arcanine was almost the 30th most used Pokemon in the format and continued to rack up placements for its unique brand of Crushing Incin, the third most used Pokemon behind Fluttermane and the Ogerpons. A bunch of players on screen placed well with it in top 8s. Hisuian Arcanine's usage and placements fell off quite a bit for the last stretch of 2024 though, but it was excellent when it worked. And with that, it had a few more notable placements on screen here. At the time of this video, there's still time for Hisuian Arcanine to make a splash in the last stretch of the 2026 season. And now we can answer the question, so how great were Arcanine and Hisuian Arcanine actually? Well, Cantonian Arcanine has had a strange sort of career. It's regularly wound up in tiers that it doesn't really belong in. Early on, it had to navigate the awkwardness of being a physical attacker without physical stab and bounce among Gen 1's very lowest tiers while not having a place in Gen 2's UU, despite having the tier's highest base stat total. In Gen 3 though, after languishing in BL Purgatory for almost 2 decades, it was finally allowed into UU and became elite there. Its calling card was Gen 4 UU though, where its statuses of being an iconic fan favorite and one of the metagame's very best Pokemon helped make the tier incredibly popular. Gen 5 though, despite providing some serious buffs, kicked off a streak where Arcanine consistently wound up in the wrong places. It didn't do much of anything in UU there, and in Gen 6, despite not having much to do, it sadly did not fall to RU that it desperately wanted to be in. It did manage that in Gen 7, but by that point it was only okay in RU and really wanted to be in NU. Then in Gen 8, Arcanine found itself in NU with some amazing buffs, and after a great start, wound up being outclassed even there, unable to drop to its newly desired PU there or in Gen 9. On the bright side, Arcanine has had an amazing VGC career. After some promising placements in Gens 5 and 6, it established itself as one of the best, most defining Pokemon of the 2017 season. Now, it would become completely displaced once Incineroar gained Intimidate and joined the fray, which would become its MO in the following 2 generations as well, which is early on, be dominant, then get replaced once Incineroar is available. Still, when Arcanine was on, it was on. Finally, Hisuian Arcanine was an amazing boost. In singles, its recoil-lacking stab head smashes made it a ferocious UU wall breaker, while in VGC, its impressive offensive profile gave it a niche as well, one that actually took off once Incineroar entered the fray, since it was so adept at smashing it to pieces. Its success was brief, but significant, and the Hisuian's form's success meant both Arcanine were, at times, key elements of Gen 9 VGC. All in all, Arcanine has had a rather storied competitive career to everyone's delight. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Daniel Isbeast, Corman, Don Creek, Eric Dissing, Espion Lover, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Nightfall, Megamon VGC, Mojo Game Slayer, Nurse Jake, One Penguin to Rule, Pretzel SP, Palamute, Schmooter, Seagulls Incorporated, Soljiro Sakura, Spavoon, Gylaria, Soras and Croxid, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Tyler, Kiboflu, Wardine, Zathor for their major support of our videos.